So how did we get to this moment in the history of the Church of the Ascension? I don't claim to know a lot. I just know what I've picked up from other people. There are many people in the congregation who can tell you in more detail some of the drama and the joys of Ascension's life over the recent decades. I can only tell you what I've heard or read about. And I hope that you have a chance sometime to read what Jane Hovey wrote about 20 years ago, which is a pretty detailed account of persistence and faithfulness and resilience as this small band of people developed a parish and built a building and built another building and have carried on ministry in Cranston for all these years. The Church of the Ascension is, after all, the body of Christ, which is descended from Jerusalem on Easter morning, through the Church of England, through the Episcopal Church of the United States, through the Diocese of Rhode Island, and ultimately through the Church of the Epiphany on Potter's Avenue, a building which still stands there. And in 1883, they decided they would canvass the neighborhood here and see if there was interest in developing a congregation. And they used very much the same techniques that Mercedes used just a few years ago to develop the Latino congregation. They knocked on doors, they met with people, they worshiped in people's houses, they spread by word of mouth, they solicited family members. They did all the things you do to draw together an initial congregation. And they were successful. Within 5 years. They had been given a piece of land on the corner of Park Avenue and Wellington, and they built a building, a wood shingle building, with church building with a parish hall attached, which they funded in part by their own donations, but in part also by a mortgage which lasted about 25 years before they paid it all off. During those early days, there was not a single one clergy person who carried the ball. It was mostly the work of the lay people who were gathered and inspired by the word of Christ in this tradition. And it was in about 1900 that the bishop began appointing specific clergy to serve the parish. And year after year, and some of those tenures were blessedly long, and some were blessedly short. In the 1940s, rumors had spread that the construction of Route 95 was going to come through. So the church needed to find a new place. And they found this place that we are now in at a price that they could afford. And they built this building in this location and opened for worship in 1956. Funds for the building were raised by the congregation itself, which was really quite remarkable given the quality of this building and how long it has endured. I'm told that a big portion of the funds actually were raised by parishioners bringing their newspapers to church on Sundays, and a group would recycle them. In those days, you could get money for recycled newspaper, and they would take the proceeds and put them into the building fund. It was a major part of the parish life for a while. Both our present baptismal font that you pass on the entrance to the church every time, and the lectern from which the readings are read, were moved from the old church and are a part of that, as is the rear glass, which that lovely carving on the back, which originally came to us as a gift from a bishop, and where to which was added the high altar underneath, which was made by a parishioner George Benvey, and then in later time, the table which we now use as an altar week in and week out was built by two other parishioners, Fred Whiteside and Don Young. Since the first priest that was appointed 125 years ago or so, there have been about 25 priests on the staff of Ascension. 3 of them significantly shaped the parish. And one was James Duncan in the 1930s, who introduced high church liturgy, the sort of smells and bells and formality of worship, which became a part of the Ascension tradition. The second one was Arthur Wood, who served for 27 years, and during those 27 years was the moving from one building to the next and the establishment of a rather healthy, bubbling, post-war parish life in the 40s and 50s. And the third was Bob Vanderoe, whose 11 years here during the 90s and 2000s brought the parish stability and growth. During his time, we established our support of the Interfaith Food Pantry, which continues to this day, and we learned to sing liturgy pretty well. Between all those rectors, there were a lot of other coming ups and downs, and our survival is really a tribute to the faithfulness and persistence of many, many people over the years serving as wardens or vestry or parishioners or pledgers or just carrying on one ministry or another in the parish's name. In 2008, Greg Lisby came as our first openly gay priest, married to another Episcopal priest with 2 adopted children. He was very popular, and he brought about some good changes, particularly in community engagement and in the liturgy. It became apparent, however, that the parish could no longer support a full-time rector. So when Greg left after just 2 years, he was replaced with a half-time priest. I have been here as the half-time priest since 2010. Within 6 months of my arrival, the diocese approached the vestry about establishing a Spanish-speaking worshiping congregation as part of our parish, and the vestry enthusiastically agreed to the idea, and then welcomed Mercedes Julian that very same year. Working out of the basement or out of a back room or on the streets, she slowly drew together the core of parishioners, so many of whom remain central to our life today, some of whom have names like Espinal and de los Santos. 5 years ago, when Mercedes retired, the diocese reduced the position from full-time to half-time and appointed Pastor Santiago, who we are happy to share with Gloria Dei Lutheran Church. In this decade, our congregation has been enriched by new members of various traditions and has a lively diversity whenever we come together. We've maintained our commitment to the food pantry, we've supplied monthly meals to the women of Starbirth, and we have welcomed a family of former refugees as tenants in our rectory. It must be noted, however, that this parish has never been a wealthy one. We have survived, on the one hand, by consistent and generous support of pledgers, not in huge sums, but dedicatedly. And on the other hand, by the occasional generous gift by one person or another to accomplish one purpose or another, to get us through the storm. Our present financial situation, which is not smooth, is nothing new, however, in the history of the parish. So who are we now? That is the question which calls our attention. We are the product of this long history, but we're also something new. We are a bilingual congregation which has been trying for 10 years now to reach out across cultural and language divides to live into the unity which Christ calls us to. We're a very unique congregation. There are not many others in the church like us. And it's true, the path before us is not well marked or clear. But our immediate task is not so complicated. We are to grow in mutual understanding and trust and love as a community. We must listen to one another and hear in one another the voice of Christ. If we do that, God will take care of the rest. God will show us the way. God will provide. Our parish conversations, which we start now, seem like a good next step.